Well, kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to today's briefing. And today I have with me Kiriana Brooking, who is our Deputy Chief Executive for our COVID-19 response here in the Ministry. And as part of our initial presentation, she will talk through the 55 exemptions, compassionate exemptions and other exemptions. I'll do the rest of the initial briefing, and then if there are questions around the 55, I've brought Kiriana along because she's very well placed to answer your questions and just provide some of the context around the numbers that we put out last night. So today there is one new case of COVID-19 to report who is in managed isolation in New Zealand. The person who tested positive is a woman in her 60s. She arrived in New Zealand on the 18th of June. She travelled on an Air India repatriation flight, and the code for all such Air India flights is actually the same, AI 1316. So this woman has been staying at the Pullman Hotel in Auckland. Obviously now she is being confirmed as a case, the usual protocols, and she has been transferred to the Jet Park quarantine facility late yesterday. So yesterday, as many of you will know, our laboratories processed 9,174 tests, our highest day of testing since we began. That includes testing undertaken in the managed isolation facilities as part of our around day 3 and around day 12 protocols, as well as testing across the community. So there is not only good capacity for us to do the swabbing across our communities, but also, of course, our labs have that really good capacity to process the tests. We have already one of the strongest border systems in the world, with people coming home and required to stay in managed isolation or quarantine for that 14 days. That remains, as I said yesterday, the mainstay of our border measures and has been in place since Cabinet's decision on the 9th of April. We've had more than 20,000 people through managed isolation facilities with no evidence of any spread from there into our communities. And in addition, people departing managed isolation must now return a negative test prior to being released from managed isolation. They can refuse the test, and we then have the potential to require them to stay for another up to 14 days. Since the 16th of June, when we had the 2 cases a week ago, for the 2 women who had reported back from the UK, starting from the 16th of June, there's been more than 45,000 tests completed in New Zealand on that day and on subsequent days. And as you will be aware, the only cases we have detected are the cases who are in managed isolation facilities. However, those 2 cases did draw all of our attention to a gap that was there in the system between what we expected was happening, the policy intent, and what was happening on the ground. We moved quickly, immediately, in fact, to remedy that and ensure that those leaving managed isolation were also being tested in addition to completing their 14 days. We also began following up with 3 groups to ensure all our bases were covered as an extra precautionary approach. And the first group was those who had received an exemption to leave managed isolation on compassionate grounds. That's the group of 55 who left between the 9th and the 16th of June. And one of these people subsequently had their approval withdrawn and so remained in managed isolation for the 14 days. And I'm just going to hand over to Kiriana, who will talk through a little bit more detail about that remaining group, the 54.
Kia ora koutou katoa. So 55 people left managed isolation on compassionate grounds, either to self-isolate in the community or to make visits into the community. 34 people were granted an exemption to attend the funeral of a family member or grieve with family. These people either returned to the facility or self-isolated in an agreed location. During this time, the guidance changed to allow people to leave managed isolation to go and grieve in the family home. Applications received prior to that date were for attendance at a funeral for a loved one. 16 applications were granted to self-isolate with a family member who was close to dying. 4 applications were granted for day visits to see a family member that was close to dying. These people returned to managed isolation each day. 1 person was granted an exemption because of a terminal medical condition. These group of people were granted exemption from managed isolation for exceptional circumstances. As part of leaving managed isolation, all signed a health release that required them to follow a set of protocols depending on the category of exemption. These protocols were dependent on the type of exemption and, of course, personalised to individual situations. Types of protocols included undertaking a test for COVID-19 at a CBAC, travelling directly from managed isolation facilities to the agreed address without leaving the vehicle, wearing PPE, including gloves and masks, when spending time with the family member that is dying, complying with all Ministry of Health COVID-19 guidelines, staying 2 metres apart from people outside of their bubble, washing hands regularly with soap and water for 20 seconds or clean with sanitizer, coughing or sneezing into tissues or their elbows, and washing their hands with soap and water for 20 seconds or clean with hand sanitizer. Not attending supermarkets, shops, petrol stations, or any other similar services during this time. Accessing hospitals and GPs for personal care was allowed, providing those facilities were advised before or on arrival that they were in approved self-isolation. Ministry has been in communication with all of these people since they have left the facility. Of these people, 39 have returned negative tests for COVID-19. 2 of those had had a test prior to leaving managed isolation, and another 2 were tested the same day as leaving, meaning 35 were tested after leaving managed isolation, with most tested while still in self-isolation. 11 will not be tested, either on the basis of health, because they are a child, or they have left the country. This is an increase of 4 from yesterday due to a family being unable to be tested at this time. 3 are waiting results. 1 person we understand to have had a test is now not returning contact, and this has been referred to enforcement.
Thanks, Kiriana. And as I said, Kiriana will be able to assist with answering questions about the 55 people. So going back to the U cases, the next group we went to were those who may have been in proximity with the 2 women who had returned from the UK. Again, we took a very precautionary approach to this and followed up a much wider group of people than we normally would for a confirmed case, whether in managed isolation or in the community. Of the guests in the Novotel from the 6th to the 13th of June, which was the time period the women were there, we had 6 possible contacts outstanding yesterday. 1 of those has now been contacted and referred for a test, and 5 have been referred to what we call enforcement services. But this is a team in the ministry that then follow a process. If necessary, they will ask the police to assist in finding people. We can call on the police if necessary. And of the staff from the hotel, of which there were many, only 1 remains outstanding, and the hotel continues to follow up with this person. Again, just to reiterate, these are people who were in the same facility as the 2 women, and this is part of a wider precautionary approach. So we move to the 2,159 people who left managed isolation facilities from the 9th to the 16th of June. That group includes most of the 55 people granted compassionate exemptions. Some of those who were doing day visits out may have left finally after the 16th, but many of those people are within that 2159. Since the 9th of June, we have been rolling out the testing in managed facilities around day 3 and around day 12 of people's stay, as you know. I've said it plenty of times. Prior to that, it was not a requirement. However, we are following up the balance of the people in this group to check on them as part of our broader precautionary approach and to close the loop. In addition to checking them, we are referring those who haven't had a test to go and have a test. And I'm going to provide you with the numbers. And I just want to reiterate, the reason I haven't provided you with the numbers is not because I've been trying to hide anything. I simply haven't had them, but the team have worked hard to get as up-to-date numbers as possible, and I will update them on a daily basis. So, to date, 1,010 have been contacted and we know have tested negative for COVID-19. Of those, 800 were tested before leaving managed isolation, and the remaining 210 were tested after departure from the facility. So for those of you who don't have a calculator on your phone, 800 represents around 37% of the total number. And that is our starting point, because as we contact and follow up with all those other people, we expect that proportion will grow. Then the 210 subsequent ones, that represents another 10%. So there are 239 people who have been referred for a test that we do not have a result for yet. So again, we know that there are 1,010 who have had a test and we have a negative result, another 239 referred, and we don't have a test result yet, but we are following those up. We're still in the process of connecting with the balance, which is 791. The process there is a text first, followed by a call, followed by another 3 calls, and we are following them all up with a 5th call today. We also use our finding services, customs and police, to see what data they might have on these people. And obviously, as we're now matching with NHI, we can get up-to-date contact information if it's there as well. There are also 119, which is about 5% of the people, who will not be tested because of reasons such as being a child, and we don't feel it's appropriate, being part of a repositioning crew for a ship that is here. So we have some crews come from overseas, they move very quickly through and off to their ship. And some of these people have now returned overseas, so they came and went back, and there are some who are refusing a test. So I just want to summarise, we're doing everything we can, including providing information as it comes to hand, to assure New Zealanders these people do not pose a risk to their community. And I want to emphasise again that aside from those who have the compassionate exemption or who have gone offshore, they have all completed the 14 days consistent with international evidence, and so the risk they pose to the community is very low in the first place. However, we are following them up and referring them for testing as part of closing the loop. We've taken strict action to strengthen our systems, and as soon as we became aware from the 16th, of course, everybody is now being tested. I will update daily on these numbers as the work progresses. I'm now open to questions.
Can you categorically rule out any undetected community transmission as a result of implementing facilities without tests?
I can't actually do that. However, what I can say is that there is a very low risk in the first instance because of the circumstances, indeed the 14 days, and as Kiriana has outlined, the protocols around people leaving managed isolation early on compassionate grounds, but also the wide testing we are doing, 45,000 tests since the 16th, and that, as it did during Alert Level 3, when we were looking for any evidence of community transmission, that is providing us with reassurance as well.
And how many of those 2,159 people are refusing to be tested, and what will you do about them?
Yes, so the number I had was the overall number. That is the 1,119, which includes children, people who've gone offshore, ship's crew being repositioned, and some who have refused. Now, I don't know that, but I will find out from that breakdown. Given these people are now outside managed isolation, because they have to provide informed consent for that procedure, which anyone can, we can't force the procedure on them, then there's nothing further to do, but a reminder that they have all been checked on to make sure they haven't, through the phone call, to make sure they haven't got symptoms, and of course they know what to do if they develop symptoms.
So we let them out without being tested, and now we have no recourse to test them.
We let them out having completed their 14 days of managed isolation. They didn't have a test before they left or subsequently. Of course, we have now introduced that additional measure for everybody in managed isolation.
Can I clarify? Out of that 2,159, did any of them test positive?
The only ones that tested positive were the ones who we announced this time last week. So the 2 women from the UK who were tested at a CBAC, which was one of the conditions of their release from managed isolation on compassionate grounds.
And everyone else since then has come in from the border?
All the subsequent positive tests we've had have been since then and have been picked up through our testing in a managed isolation facility, either because they were symptomatic or because it was part of the routine testing around day 3 and catching up. Yes.
Just on the issue of community transmission, what do you make of Todd Miller, the leader of the opposition, making those comments this morning?
So I don't know what his exact comments were, and I think Professor Des Gorman had some comments to make. Our job is to make sure that we are not, that we're preventing the virus coming into New Zealand, and to have really good mechanisms in place to detect the virus if it is out there. We've got these high numbers of tests being done, and we have our surveillance testing that is also coming on stream as well around the border, including staff working at the border, those in managed isolation and quarantine facilities, as well as aircrew, expectations on aircrew too. So these are the sorts of measures we can put in place. In addition, we have our ILI, our influenza-like illness surveillance happening through the app, as well as pulling health stat data from over 300 practices. This will give us an early indication if there is any uplift in influenza-like illness. At the moment, all those tests have been done, and we are not detecting any COVID outside of our managed isolation facilities.
Why guests at the Rotorua Ibis this morning were given notices saying they have to stay in their rooms until further notice?
It may well be that there has been a case there. However, I'm reporting on the cases that came through from 9 o'clock until 9 o'clock this morning. We will report on any cases that happen subsequently, either in Rotorua, in Christchurch, or Auckland, in tomorrow's report, so I can give all the details. But there may well be guests there who, off the back of a hotel implementing some measures they do, it makes it clear there may be a case at that facility.
So you can't give any wider policy for people to stay in their rooms until they've had a negative test result?
The people, no, it's not. And so this is the facility, I suspect, doing something in response to a positive test that would have happened through the testing, or someone who was symptomatic. This would, if that's the case, that would be the first case down there, so they're taking a precautionary approach. I think that's appropriate.
Have you been given any preliminary advice about?
Sorry, I've just got a question here. Please.
Hi. If someone tests positive in a facility in like Rotorua or Christchurch, where will they be going? Is there facilities in Christchurch to manage them, or will they be travelling back to Auckland?
So in each place, we would have an arrangement to be able to replicate a quarantine type arrangement in Auckland, because of the number of hotels. Right from the start, we have used a dedicated facility, the Jet Park, for all those people. It's just helpful to have them all in one place for the attending doctor who looks after their clinical care. Likewise, in both Christchurch and Rotorua, there will be an area that can be used as a quarantine type facility to ensure that there are additional precautions taken, and that medical and nursing staff can do their work as well.
So are those additional facilities ready to go now, or will if they test positive now, will they be shipped off to Auckland?
They will have needed to be in place in those locations from when the facilities were designated for use. So rather than it being a separate facility as it is in Auckland, it will be in one of the existing facilities down there.
So
Can you tell us anything more about the one person out of the 55 who's not returning calls? And how concerning is that?
Do you want to?
Yeah. I'm not in a position to talk about the one person. I've got no further details. They, as I had said, they are someone who has had a test, but we are now not able to locate them. So we have referred them to enforcement.
Is the test negative? Does the result come back?
I'm not in a position to provide an answer to
that
that.
means potentially there's someone who might have tested positive and we don't know where they are.
There's nothing. If there is a positive test,
Yeah.
So if there is a positive test from anywhere, whether we know where the person is, we get a heads up immediately, so we would know if there had been a positive result. There's also some people. Yeah, there are also some people in the group, in the 55 that Kiriana spoke about, who believe they have had a test, and we're just not able to verify that. So I'm not sure if that applies to this one person. So amongst the group of 11, there are people who think they've had a test, and we're just trying to verify that. So they're not prepared to have another test because they believe they've had one, but we'll keep trying to match with our database as well. These were people on compassionate exemptions, yeah, and who had, remember, all these other very strict criteria around and expectations around their departure from the facility.
So we have no legal power to ask them.
If we think they present a risk to the community, yes, they have a legal power under the Health Act as a medical officer of health to require them to be taken into a facility that yes, I could do that. However, we don't believe they present a risk to the community.
What's the threshold for that? Do they have to display little symptoms of COVID?
Sorry, what's
What's
the?
the threshold for that? Do they have to display symptoms of COVID before you can make that order?
It would be a consideration of any symptoms if they did have any. Yes, that would be the primary thing because it's a decision on a medical basis. However, if we felt that they were presenting a risk to the community, then we could have a power. We don't in this case think they present a risk to the community, remembering that most of them will have completed now their 14 days post coming into the country.
On those 55, there were some that you said were released into the community on the understanding that they would get a test to see back. That was part of the protocol.
Yes.
Is that right? Why was that happening when they were supposed to be tested in the facilities?
Do you want to talk about that?
Because it seems like you've made that plan.
Yes, certainly. So when the Prime Minister made the announcement to move into Alert Level 1, we had a number of applications that had been received that were being progressed. The decision was made to treat those applications under the conditions in which they had applied. So we had quite a strict set of protocols for infection prevention control that were wrapped around those applications. Not every application that had come in before the announcement was approved, but the applications that had come in that we were able to approve, we did, providing they had a number of protocols around them. Not all of the applications required people to be tested. As I outlined, we had a series of protocols that we used.
So you didn't have those applications after June 9 and go before they left. You didn't go, we'll go back and revise that. You didn't look backwards.
So what we did is that as every alert level changed, we had a number of applications that had been received prior to the alert level announcement. So we would look at the alert level announcement, we would look at the applications that had come in. People had applied and arrived in New Zealand under the conditions in which they had applied. So we treated those applications under those conditions.
That didn't happen with the two sisters who came from the UK. They applied on June 12th. Can you talk about why
those applications under those conditions?
Why wasn't it one of the two sisters? Have you gotten to the bottom of why on June 12th protocols that we talk about why
those applications under so we're just working through the process, each step of the process, and at what point those applications under. So we're just working through the process, each step of. I will say that at what point those applications. So we're just working through the process, each step during the night. I will say that under the what protocol those applications. So we're just working through the process each step during the night. I will say that under the what protocol those applications. So we're just working through the process each step during the night. I will say that under the what protocol those applications. So we're just working through the process each step during the night. I will say that under the what protocol.
in isolation before being granted professional leave. Were
So-
any of those applications that were
Yeah.
granted after June 9?
Yes.
and before
So
June 16,
so
were any of those applied?
yeah, so a large number of the applications that were approved during the period 9th to the 16th of June related to previous applications. We had a number of applications that we received and processed, but they weren't related to compassionate grounds. We had a very small number of applications, as you could see by the tests, where they had completed 7 days and had received a negative test.
So the last couple of questions of my colleagues. First of all, are you aware of a case or any cases in Rotorua? And does that throw up any concerns about the way those people were transported?
Yes, so having just talked about that,
Are you aware of it?
I'm aware there is a case in a Rotorua facility, and I think that's there's some publicity around that, and it doesn't raise any concerns with me about the way they were transported, because I know, having talked to Air Commodore Webb and his team, that the very strict protocols were followed for that transportation. Just reminding people that we have been doing this since that first evacuation flight out of Wuhan, and so we have a lot of experience with keeping people, including both the people returning and the staff and crew who are transporting people, safe.
So just on that,
There's one more question then.
Sorry, yeah. With the high demand for testing, what's the current advice for members of the public who should get tested and when?
So the advice remains the same, that if you have symptoms, respiratory symptoms that could be suggestive of COVID-19, then you should seek advice from your health professional or through Healthline about getting a test. And we have seen that many people have been doing that, which is good. However, I also want to go back to my comments to reassure people we have no evidence there is COVID-19 out in the community. That wide community testing is an important part of our wide, as I called yesterday, sort of supercharged sentinel testing.
GPs are being overwhelmed and running out of swabs, so is the current level of public testing sustainable?
Yes, it is sustainable, and we have done high rates of testing, as you know, right through alert level 4 and 3. If there are swab shortages or people are getting low on swabs, we've got good mechanisms in place to distribute them, please.
A homeless person at Crown Plaza, what are the protocols when new arrive in these facilities? Are their names kind of cross-referenced? Do they have to show a boarding pass? How do they get in? How did someone get through?
Well, unless there's been some other evidence provided, I'm not. I think that there's no evidence to prove that a homeless person got into one of the facilities. However, yes, I have been at one of the facilities and been talked through the process that happens as people come in. It's a very, very carefully managed process to check people in off the buses or other transport, and then to get them up to their rooms in a way that is safe, of course, for the people coming in and the staff there.
Okay, and the Ministry of Health staff at Auckland Airport, do they know who's coming off the planes? How do they decide where those people go? Like, how do they allocate it around the country?
So the health staff there work with the other border staff and the team who look after all the managed isolation facilities. The main involvement of the health staff is to assess each person as they come through for symptoms. To ask the questions, and if they do have symptoms, then they're checked, and if they're symptomatic, they go to that Jack Part facility. But the overall then allocation of people to hotels sits with the all of government managed isolation team, of which the health is part of the team.
Those 39 cases you mentioned where there are still pending tests. Does that mean that those people came out of isolation without receiving the test because they shouldn't get pending test results?
So the 239, yes. I would imagine if the results pending still, because we usually get the results within at the outset, at most about 48 hours. So those are people who probably have been tested since they left managed isolation. Then there is the rest of the group that we are following up, of course, and it may well be that some of those were tested before they left or have had a test subsequently. If they haven't, then we'll refer them for testing.
So it's essentially 800 people who left having had a test prior to leaving.
At least 800, yes.
At least 800, and at least then 449 who left without receiving a test.
And who have been tested subsequently, and all the ones who we have results on so far are negative. Again, recalling that this is the group that have done their 14 days isolation, but we're just wanting to close the loop on this.
That's fair extrapolation, 449 people were tested before being released.
Well, yes, and it may be more, but what we can say for certain, we know 800 people were tested before they departed. I did, yes. I said of the 2,139, there were 800 people that we can had left. That's the 37% proportion I gave. 800 people who had been tested before they departed that we know. That may well increase as we contact more people down the back. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, can I just ask, with that record number of testing, what do you think that says about the state of mind at the moment? Do you think people are feeling really nervous that this could be out in our community?
I think what it says is that the last week has been a reminder to all of us that, as we've been saying for some time, we need to remain vigilant, and there is an escalating pandemic offshore, and we've seen reports from a number of countries overnight that had been easing restrictions that are now having to tighten them, either in regions or even across the country. We are seeing further cases in the USA in a number of parts. So I think it's been a reminder to people. We are in a very fortunate position here to be in alert level 1. However, we need to remain incredibly vigilant, and I continue to encourage people, if they do have symptoms, to be tested. Just down the back. Oh, no, I don't have any comment. I think there'll be plenty of people commenting on that already. Derek, maybe a couple of more questions.
Do we have enough CVAX there's like reports of 4-hour waits.
Yeah.
Just big surge in demand. Do we need more?
Look, we're talking to all the DHBs. We had a teleconference with them yesterday afternoon about making sure that there is ready access to testing, and we want them to maintain CBAC capacity and also be able to stand up more capacity very quickly if needed. So we're wanting to retain that capacity.
A number of those CBACs were closed.
Yes, that's right. But from when the peak was, but all DHBs can scale up the testing. And part of the reason they closed is we were using them in particular during the lockdown period, and subsequently, while general practices were seeing most of their people through virtual consultations. A couple more questions. One here first.
They have been told they might have to wait up to 8 days for the results of their testing at community testing centres. Are you aware of those delays, how widespread they are, and if that's kind of quick enough? Because obviously
it's not quick enough, and so I'll follow up with my team, but on that, because if we need to, we can move volumes of testing to other labs around the country. So we'll make sure that they don't have to wait that long.
Do you know why those delays are happening?
Well, it may just be the volume of tests that they're pushing through, and of course the priority will be on pushing the tests through, and as has been the case right from the start, immediate notification of any positive result. But of course, for an individual, it's important that they get their knowledge of a negative result too, to provide them with assurance. I don't, but it's something we'll look into, because we have seen this big increase in the testing, and so that will be, putting some pressure on the labs. So we'll want to see what other support they might need to get the results out to people as quickly as possible.
Michael, we have to talk about strains in the relationship between you and David Clark. Has there been a relationship breakdown between you and the Health Minister?
No.
Is it irresponsible at all for politicians or professors or people in general to come out and say that COVID is likely in the community now?
Well, I don't want to comment on that. What I can comment on are the things that I am responsible for, and that's why I come to brief you every day. Thank you very much. I don't have any comment to make on that.
Okay, kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon. Look, I'll do a brief introduction, just headline a few announcements for the week, and then I'll open up for questions. But what we'll do this time is just make sure that we front end the COVID questions if we can for Dr. Bloomfield, and then we'll just move into more general if we can. The House sits again this week, meaning select committees are also once again in full swing. I'll be in the House on Tuesday and Wednesday as usual. As you would expect, our economic recovery from COVID-19 continues to be my focus this week. On Wednesday, I will be holding a virtual summit with Prime Minister Lee of Singapore to mark the 1-year anniversary of the New Zealand-Singapore Enhanced Partnership. That partnership underpins cooperation in a range of areas. New Zealand's relationship with Singapore has been critical in recent months as we have worked closely to secure critical supplies such as COVID testing kits and PPE, and to ensure trade links remain open to the benefit of our exporters. On Wednesday evening, I will participate in a conference call of world leaders in the so-called Early Movers Initiative. It's a grouping of nations that by and large went hard and early to beat COVID-19 and are exchanging information on the best approaches to take as many, such as New Zealand, begin to de-escalate restrictions. The call is hosted by the Austrian Chancellor and includes leaders from Australia, Norway, Denmark and Israel, just to name a few. On Thursday, I will attend virtually the local and central government forum and undertake COVID recovery visits in the Wellington region. And on Friday, I'll be in the Hawke's Bay for further economic recovery related visits. Tourism New Zealand has just launched the Do Something New New Zealand campaign, encouraging Kiwis to see parts of the country they haven't been to before to help get our economy and tourism sector moving again. And I urge anyone who is in a position to do so to help our recovery and support our local tourism operators by booking a visit to our own incredible backyard. I'm still in the process of locking down my plans for the weekend, but I do intend, as much as I'm able, to get out and about and support our local economies as well. As signalled last week, Cabinet today discussed the Alert Level 2 settings and the pathway to move to Level 1 as soon as safely possible. Last week I said we would regularly adjust our settings at Level 2 to allow more activity to take place when the advice and data says it's safe. We want to get our economy moving quickly without losing the gains we have made to date. It takes about 2 weeks for changes in levels to start showing up in our cases, as we're all now familiar. So we can now be highly confident, more than 3 weeks after the shift to Level 3, that there are no new cases attributable to the more relaxed restrictions which we had as we stepped down into Level 3 and started moving beyond that. That is very good news and is counter to what many countries overseas have experienced as they loosen their restrictions, with many having seen spikes in cases. This is in large part to New Zealanders sticking to the rules at 3, maintaining physical distancing, ensuring we limited the activities most likely to spread the virus, and of course the ongoing role of our border controls and the quarantine at our border. On the basis of this good news though, Cabinet has decided we can now increase the size of all gatherings to 100 from 12 noon this Friday, 29 May. This means gatherings such as church services, weddings and funerals can now have 100 people present. There also no longer will be a need for funerals or tangihanga to pre-register via the Ministry of Health, as they had been previously doing to date. The move to 100 also allows community sport to operate more easily, and I understand Sporting Codes have been working on operational guidance with Sport New Zealand. Large-scale events like concerts will obviously still have those restrictions applied in terms of size, but the shift to 100 person